They didn't yell. They didn't break things. They didn't say something cruel. They just stopped talking. No goodbye, no explanation, no closure, just silence. And somehow, that hurt more than any word ever could. It's strange, isn't it? How something as empty as silence can feel so heavy. How the absence of words can echo louder than screams. How the quiet can keep you up at night, replaying memories like a song stuck on repeat. You check your phone again. Nothing. You wonder, did I say something wrong? Did I come on too strong? You scroll up, rereading the last message you sent, trying to find some hidden reason they stopped responding. But there's nothing. No answer. Just silence. And your mind, it doesn't stay silent. It fills in the blanks with fear, with guilt, with stories about not being enough. We think that silence is peace. But when it comes from someone we care about, silence becomes a storm. It becomes confusion. It becomes grief for something that hasn't even ended out loud. And the worst part, no one else sees it. Because how do you explain to someone that what's breaking you is something that wasn't even said? You tell your friend, he hasn't texted me in days. And they say, maybe he's just busy. But you know, it's more than that. It's a shift. It's a disappearance. It's being left in a space that used to be full of conversation, laughter, good mornings and good nights. And now it's just nothing. Let me ask you something. Why do we hurt more when they say nothing than when they say something cruel? Why does silence make us question ourselves more than rejection? Why does being ignored by someone you love feel like being erased? There's a part of you that wants to reach out again, to ask if they're okay, to say, did I do something wrong, to break the silence, just so you don't have to sit in it. But deep down, you already know. If they wanted to talk, they would. And that knowing, that's what really hurts. Carl Jung once said that the greatest wounds are often invisible. They live in the quiet, in the pauses, in what's left unsaid. And sometimes silence isn't just absence. It's a message. It's avoidance. It's the easy way out. Because saying goodbye takes courage, but ghosting, that's cowardice in disguise. You want closure. You want answers. You want something to hold on to. But all you're left with is your own thoughts. And they haven't been kind lately. You start questioning your worth. You wonder if you were too much or not enough. You tell yourself if I mattered, they would have stayed. But here's what I want to say to you. What they did is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity. Not everyone is brave enough to love honestly. Not everyone knows how to stay. Silence teaches us things that words never could. It shows us who was willing to fight for us and who vanished the moment things got real. It reveals the difference between presence and performance, between interest and intention, between someone who says they care and someone who actually does. You might be thinking, but I just want to stop thinking about them. And I get it. But healing doesn't start with forgetting. It starts with facing what's been left behind. And sometimes what's been left behind is silence. And sometimes the silence is exactly where the healing begins. So in this video, we're going to talk about it. We're going to break down the 10 reasons why silence, especially from someone you love, hurts more than words ever could. We'll talk about the psychology behind it. We'll talk about the emotions it brings up. We'll talk about how to stop blaming yourself for the things they never said. But more than anything, we're going to give a voice to the pain that no one else seems to understand. Because if you've ever been haunted by a silence that won't leave you alone, this video is for you. Let's begin. When silence feels like abandonment. They didn't leave with a goodbye. They left with a pause that never ended. And that pause, it felt like abandonment. Not the kind you can explain easily. Not the kind people see. But the quiet kind. the kind that creeps into your chest and stays there. Because silence doesn't always sound like nothing. Sometimes it sounds like I don't care enough to explain, or you're not worth the truth, or worst of all, I'm already gone. You didn't get to prepare. You didn't get to protect your heart. You were just left. That kind of silence, it doesn't echo. It haunts. You wake up and check your phone like muscle memory. Still nothing. You open Instagram, hoping maybe, just maybe you'll see something that tells you it's not over. But it is. You just weren't invited to the ending. When someone you love goes silent, it doesn't feel neutral. It feels intentional. It feels like being pushed away without being touched. And maybe you start telling yourself stories again. He's just going through something. He's not good at communication. Maybe if I give him space, he'll come back. But the truth is, silence is an answer. It's just not the one you wanted. Here's the thing, we don't talk about enough. Silence triggers something old, something deep. Maybe it's the memory of a parent who shut down emotionally when you needed them most. Maybe it's the feeling of being the only one left out as a kid. Maybe it's all the times you were told to be quiet, to shrink, to not make a scene. That moment when they stop responding, it reopens every wound that ever whispered, "You're not important." And the worst part, you don't get to cry about it the way you would with a breakup. There's no announcement, no label, no permission to grieve. You're just supposed to move on quietly, just like they did. But your body remembers. Your mind replays everything, every message. Every night you stayed up talking. Every small moment you thought meant something, because it did. It meant something to you, and now you're left wondering why it didn't mean enough to them. Here's what I need you to hear today. Their silence is not proof that you were too much. It's not proof that you were hard to love, and it's not proof that you weren't enough. Their silence is just that, their silence. It belongs to their patterns, their fears, their inability to face hard conversations. You were brave. You showed up. You opened your heart, and they couldn't meet you there. That's not your fault. That's not your burden to carry. I know it hurts. I know it feels like something is missing that you can't name. But sometimes what's missing is someone who was never fully present to begin with. Sometimes we hold on to the idea of who someone could have been if only they had tried. But healing starts when we stop waiting for a version of them that never arrived. Silence feels like abandonment because your heart gave something real, and it hurts when that kind of love isn't returned. But here's the truth that changed everything for me. If someone's silence can make you question your worth, it means there's still a part of you learning how to love yourself louder. Because your voice, it matters. Your pain, it's real. And your healing, it begins right here with the choice to no longer chase what went quiet. So if you're sitting in that silence right now, if you're checking your phone more than you want to admit, if you're blaming yourself for someone else's emotional absence, I want you to know this. You are not alone, and this is not the end of your story. This is just the space in between, the breath, before you start remembering who you were, before their silence made you forget. You don't need their message to feel seen. You don't need their apology to begin healing. You don't need their presence to validate your value. Let their silence stay theirs and come back to your own voice. Because the moment you stop waiting for them to speak is the moment you begin to truly hear yourself. Why words end things, but silence keeps them open. You can argue, you can scream, you can say things you regret, and still those words can bring some kind of closure. Because at least something was said. At least you know where you stand. But silence doesn't end anything. It leaves everything open. unfinished, unnamed. And that's what drives people crazy. It's not just that they left, it's that they left the story mid-sentence, and you're stuck there holding the pen wondering what the ending was supposed to be. The truth is, the human brain craves closure. It's how we protect ourselves. We want to know, was it something I said? Did they lose interest? Did I push too hard? Was I never enough? And when there's no explanation, no message, no conversation, our mind starts writing its own ending. But here's the hard truth. The story we create in the silence is usually darker than reality. Because when we don't know what happened, we assume it was our fault. And that's where the real damage begins. That's how silence becomes a trap. It doesn't just hurt. Once it hurts every time you try to fill in the blank. Every time you tell yourself it was your fault. Every time you imagine they've already moved on. Every time you believe you were easy to forget. Here's a question most people don't like to ask. Would you rather someone say something cruel or say nothing at all? It sounds harsh, but think about it. Some people say I'd rather know the truth even if it hurts, but others, they say I don't want to hear it. I'd rather be ghosted than be told I wasn't enough. And that's where it gets complicated, because silence can be a way of avoiding guilt. It can also be a way of avoiding the truth. Maybe they didn't want to say I don't feel the same way. Maybe they didn't want to admit they were never fully in it. So they said nothing. They thought silence was kinder. But was it? Is leaving someone to question their entire worth really kinder? Or is it just easier? Let's be honest here. Ghosting has become normal, acceptable even, especially in dating. You talk every day, you share laughs, you make plans, and then one day, nothing. No explanation, no goodbye, no warning. And people defend it. Oh, they're just busy. Maybe they didn't know how to end it. But what we're not talking about is how deeply it affects the person left behind. How much emotional labor they carry, trying to understand a silence that isn't theirs. How much shame they quietly sit with thinking they were the problem. When in reality, the silence says more about the one who disappeared than the one who got left. Sometimes, the person who goes silent is the one who couldn't face accountability. They didn't have the courage to be honest. And yet you're the one left overthinking it. It's not fair, I know, but maybe this will help. When someone ends things with silence, what they're really doing is protecting their comfort, not your feelings. And if someone chooses their comfort over your clarity, that's not someone you want to keep chasing, because real connection, honest grown-up connection, requires hard conversations. It means saying, this isn't working, or I'm not ready, or even I don't know what I want. Is that painful to hear? Yes, but at least it gives you the power to move forward. At least it closes the door. Silence leaves the door cracked open just enough for hope to crawl in. And hope without clarity. That's how we get stuck. So, if you're stuck, if you keep wondering why they left what you did, whether it could have been different, just know this. You are not meant to live in the maybe. You deserve a full answer even if it hurts. And if they couldn't give you that, let that be the answer. Not every ending is loud. Some slip out the back door and hope you don't notice. But you did. And now it's your story to finish. No more waiting for a message that may never come. No more writing chapters for someone who left mid-paragraph. Close the book yourself. Because silence might not give you closure, but you can. The silent treatment feels like emotional abandonment. You can be in the same room with someone and still feel completely alone. That's what silence does. It doesn't just show up when someone leaves. It shows up while they're still right there, sitting next to you, scrolling their phone like you don't exist. And that kind of silence, it's brutal. It's the kind of pain you can't point to. The kind that builds slowly until one day you realize you haven't really felt seen in weeks. It's the emotional version of being ghosted. While still technically together, you try to talk, you try to connect, but they give you one-word answers. They avoid eye contact. They look at their screen more than they look at you, and somehow that makes you feel invisible. Let's call it what it is: emotional abandonment. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves scars. Because love isn't just about being physically present, it's about being emotionally available. And when someone stops showing up in that way, it hurts just as much, sometimes more, than being left entirely. But here's where it gets tricky. If you bring it up, you might be told, "You're too sensitive." You might hear, "I'm just tired," or "You're always overreacting." So you start second-guessing yourself. You start shrinking your needs. You stop asking for connection, because every time you do, you feel like a burden. But wanting to feel emotionally connected is not a burden. It's basic human need. Here's something a lot of people don't want to admit. Silent treatment is a form of emotional manipulation. Not always, but often. Sometimes it's used to punish, to create distance, to make the other person feel unsure, anxious, desperate to fix something they didn't even break. That's not love. That's control. And yet so many of us were taught to normalize it. We were told that men just don't talk about their feelings, or that some people just need space. But there's a difference between needing space and weaponizing silence. There's a difference between healthy boundaries and emotional abandonment. And if you've ever sat in a room with someone you love and felt like your voice no longer mattered, you know the difference. You know how silence can wrap around you like fog, making you doubt everything. You know how it feels to talk and not be heard, to cry and not be comforted, to exist next to someone who feels galaxies away. That's not healthy. And no matter how many times someone tells you, "It's just how I deal with things," it doesn't make it okay. Because how you deal with things should never make the people you love feel unloved. Here's the part that might feel uncomfortable. Sometimes the person who gives you the silent treatment knows exactly what they're doing. They know that ignoring you will make you anxious, that pulling away will make you chase, that saying nothing will make you overcompensate. It's not always conscious, but it's effective. And for people who fear vulnerability or confrontation, silence becomes their armor. But here's the truth. Love without communication is just proximity. It's not intimacy. It's not safety. It's not growth. If someone loves you but can't talk to you, respond to you, show up for you emotionally, what do you really have? The absence of conflict isn't peace. Sometimes it's avoidance. And avoiding problems doesn't make them disappear. It just pushes them deeper until resentment replaces connection. So if you've been on the receiving end of the silent treatment, if you've begged for attention without raising your voice, if you've felt like your presence wasn't enough to spark a response, let me tell you this. Your worth is not measured by someone else's willingness to engage. You don't have to beg to be spoken to. You don't have to earn basic emotional respect. And you certainly don't have to stay in a space where silence is used as a form of punishment. Because that's not love. That's emotional distance disguised as power. You deserve real connection, the kind where words flow freely, where silence is comfortable, not punishing, where being seen and heard isn't something you have to fight for. So the next time someone tries to make you feel like your need for communication is too much, remember this. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person, and you have every right to walk away from conversations that never begin. Silence forces you to face yourself. When they stop talking, the only voice left is yours. And sometimes, that's the hardest one to hear. At first, their silence feels like a punishment, like you're being frozen out, left behind, forgotten. But eventually, when the shock wears off and the distractions stop working, what you're really left with is yourself. And that's where things get real. Because without their voice in your life, without their texts, their presence, their approval, you're finally forced to sit with your own thoughts. And let's be honest, that's not easy. It's hard to sit in a quiet room when your mind is screaming. It's hard to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the insecurity, the fear, the ache to be chosen. But here's the wild part. Sometimes their silence is the only thing that could have brought you here. When someone pulls away, it can feel like abandonment, but it can also be an invitation. An invitation to finally ask, what have I been avoiding inside myself? Because here's the thing that surprises most people. Sometimes we chase the wrong people because they help us avoid the deeper work. We focus so much on getting them to love us, choose us, respond to us that we forget to check in with ourselves. And when they disappear, when the noise stops, we suddenly hear everything we've been running from. The self-doubt, the childhood wounds, the need for constant validation. That's not weakness, that's human. But silence holds up a mirror. And not everyone is ready to look into it. Here's something that might feel uncomfortable to admit. Sometimes, the pain isn't just about losing them. It's about losing the version of yourself that depended on them. The version that thought, I'm only lovable if they stay. And when they go quiet, that belief shatters. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe their silence is what cracks open the space for something deeper to rise. Because when you stop asking, why didn't they choose me? You start asking, why do I keep choosing people who don't? That's where healing begins. Not in the noise of needing someone else, but in the stillness of remembering yourself. You realize the ache you felt wasn't just for their presence, it was for your own. You start noticing your voice again, your truth, your needs, and little by little, you start returning home to yourself. The silence that once felt like rejection becomes the space where you finally meet your real self. Now that doesn't mean the pain disappears overnight. It still hurts. It still echoes. It still makes you reach for your phone some days, hoping for a message that never comes. But over time, that craving fades, not because they came back, but because you did, and that version of you. She doesn't beg for answers. She doesn't chase half-hearted love. She doesn't settle for silence. She speaks. She listens. She heals. So maybe the silence wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. And speaking of beginnings, that leads us to something important. Something we don't talk about enough. Why do the words left unsaid hurt more than the ones we actually heard? Why is it that the things they never said, never explained, never admitted, linger longer than anything they did? Let's talk about that next. The pain of what wasn't said. You didn't get closure. You didn't get an explanation or a goodbye or even a take care. All you got was silence. And what's strange is that the things they didn't say, they hurt more than anything they could have said out loud. Because when someone says something painful, at least you have something to work with. You can process it. You can grieve it. You can yell or cry or write it down in your journal and try to move on. But when there are no words, you're left with 1,000 questions and no answers. It's like being handed a puzzle box without all the pieces. You keep trying to make sense of it, but nothing fits. And you end up blaming yourself for something that was never yours to figure out. That's the cruelty of silence. It looks harmless, but it leaves you bleeding inside. Some people will say, maybe they didn't know what to say. And maybe that's true, but that's not comforting when your heart is breaking, and all you needed was a little honesty. The truth is not saying anything is still a choice to avoid, a choice to walk away without accountability, a choice to leave you carrying all the emotional weight. It's like this: they dropped their half of the relationship and expected you to carry both halves in silence. And maybe you did. Maybe you've been doing that for weeks, or months, or even years, holding on to all the things they never said. The apology you never got, the explanation that never came, the feelings they never owned up to. That kind of silence lingers. It doesn't fade. It becomes a ghost haunting every new connection, every attempt to trust again. Because how do you trust when the last time you opened your heart, someone walked out without saying a word? And how do you heal from a goodbye that never happened? You carry it, quietly, alone. And that's why silence is so dangerous. It isolates you in your pain. It makes you feel like you're the only one still hurting over something that technically never ended. But here's something worth saying out loud. You are allowed to grieve things that didn't have a clear ending. You are allowed to be hurt by the things they never said. And you are allowed to move on even without an apology. Because waiting for words that may never come, that's not healing. That's holding yourself hostage. So let go of the idea that closure has to come from them. Closure can be a decision you make, a conversation you have with yourself. You can choose to say, "This hurt, this mattered, but I'm not staying in this pain." You can write your own ending, even if they never gave you one. And maybe that's the most powerful thing you can do, because silence may have hurt you, but it doesn't get to define you. And that brings us to something deeper. Why is it that we take their silence and turn it into a story about our own worth? Why do we hear nothing from them and turn it into, "I'm not enough"? It's time to talk about that. When silence makes you feel like you weren't enough. It's wild, isn't it? They said nothing, and yet somehow you heard everything. Not in words, but in the way they stopped texting back, in the way they stopped showing up, in the way the silence stretched longer and longer until it became the answer you didn't want to believe. And what's worse, your mind turned their silence into a story about you, not about them, not about their fears, their limitations, or their inability to communicate. No, you made it about you. If I were prettier, maybe he would have stayed. If I hadn't said that thing, maybe she wouldn't have pulled away. If I were enough, they would have fought for me. Sound familiar? You're not alone. So many women turn someone else's emotional unavailability into personal shame. It's what we've been conditioned to do. And let's be honest here, society doesn't help. We're told that if we were the right one, we'd be loved effortlessly. We see it in movies, in songs, on social media. If he wanted to, he would. But sometimes he wanted to and still couldn't. And sometimes he didn't want to because he was never capable of real connection to begin with. But no one tells you that. So instead of seeing their silence as their struggle, you internalize it as your failure. You start walking around with this quiet belief that you're not good enough, not worthy enough, not lovable enough. And that belief, it seeps into everything. How you show up in relationships, how you trust, how you speak to yourself. But here's the truth you need to remember. Their silence is not a mirror, it's a wall. It doesn't reflect your worth. It reflects their limits. People don't always leave because you're hard to love. Sometimes they leave because they don't know how to love deeply. And yes, that's frustrating and heartbreaking and unfair, but it's also freeing because it means you don't have to carry the weight of their emotional avoidance anymore. You can stop trying to decode the silence. You can stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You can stop assuming it's your job to fix something they never had the courage to face. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of communication. You don't have to be flawless to deserve clarity. And you definitely don't have to earn someone's voice or attention. The right people. They speak. They show up. They don't leave you guessing. So if someone's silence made you feel like you weren't enough, let this be the moment you rewrite that story. You were always enough. Their silence just didn't have the capacity to hold your fullness. That's not on you. That's on them. And if that still stings, that's okay. Because the pain is real, the disappointment is valid, but so is your growth. And sometimes it's the silence that pushes you to grow the most, because it makes you ask, what do I truly deserve? What kind of love am I willing to wait for? And am I finally ready to stop proving myself to people who never really saw me? These questions matter because they lead us somewhere powerful. They lead us to the truth that silence, as painful as it is, can become a teacher. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. When the pain becomes a teacher. No one asks for the kind of silence that breaks your heart. No one wakes up hoping to be ignored, ghosted, or left hanging on red. But sometimes life gives you the silence anyway. And as much as it hurts, it has something to teach you. Not about them, about you. Because when everything goes quiet when they walk away, stop responding, disappear, you're left with the one thing you used to ignore, your own voice. And at first it's uncomfortable. You might fill the space with noise music, scrolling, texting friends just to feel something. But eventually, when the silence sticks around, you start listening. Really listening. And what you might hear is this: I'm tired of chasing. I'm tired of wondering what I did wrong. I'm tired of shrinking myself to be acceptable to people who don't even stay. That's not weakness speaking. That's clarity. Because pain, when you sit with it long enough, stops being just pain. It becomes truth. It becomes growth. It becomes a quiet voice inside you saying, never again. And that voice, that's your teacher. Now let's be honest, most of us weren't taught to see pain that way. We were taught to avoid it, distract from it, numb it. We were told, just move on, don't take it personally, be the bigger person. But what if moving on isn't about forgetting? What if it's about learning? Learning what kind of energy you will no longer beg for. Learning how to honor your feelings without needing someone else to validate them. Learning how to sit with discomfort and still choose dignity. Some people might say, you're overthinking it. Or worse, you're being dramatic. It's just a guy who stopped texting. But that's the thing. It's never just about the guy. It's about what the silence stirred up inside you. And sometimes what it stirs up is the start of something bigger. The start of boundaries. The start of emotional self-respect. The start of not settling. Because once you've been broken by silence and rebuilt by truth, you become someone different. Someone who no longer chases answers. Someone who no longer tries to earn love that should have been given freely. Someone who sits in her own worth, even when it's quiet. That version of you. She's strong, not hard, not bitter. Strong, strong enough to say, that silence hurt, but it woke me up. Strong enough to see the pain not as punishment, but as a pivot. Because that's what pain can be. A pivot, a turning point, a new chapter. And speaking of new chapters, there's something sacred that happens when you've been hurt, but stayed open anyway. When you've been ghosted, but still believe in connection. When you've been ignored, but still choose to speak your truth. That's not naive. That's powerful. And in our next chapter, we're going to talk about what it means to love with an open soul. Even after silence tried to shut you down, you loved with an open soul. Even after everything they didn't say, even after the silence, the distance, the confusion, you still loved with an open soul. You still hoped, you still gave, you still showed up with softness in a world that told you to harden. And that's not weakness. That's strength in its purest form. Because loving openly, especially after you've been hurt, is one of the bravest things you can do. It's easy to shut down, to say I'll never trust again, to build walls and wear armor and pretend you're fine. What's harder? Letting yourself feel again. Letting yourself believe that not everyone will leave without a word. Letting yourself hope, even when you're still healing. Some people might tell you that's foolish, that you should have guarded your heart better, that you should have played the game, been more detached, less emotional. But here's the thing, love isn't a game. And protecting yourself by never feeling again isn't strength, it's survival. Necessary, sometimes, yes. But it's not living. Loving with an open soul doesn't mean you let anyone in. It means you don't let what broke you turn you into someone you're not. It means you still believe in connection, even if it failed you before. It means you still choose softness, even after the world tried to make you hard. That doesn't mean you're naive. It means you know what it's like to be silenced and now you choose to speak. It means you know what it's like to be left and now you choose to stay with yourself. And maybe most of all, it means this. You know what it feels like to love deeply, and now you've learned that not everyone is ready to receive that kind of love. That doesn't mean your love was wrong. It means it was too real for someone who wasn't ready for real. That's not a failure. That's clarity. You were never too much. You were never too emotional. You were never asking for anything unreasonable. You were asking for connection, for honesty, for presence. That's not asking too much. That's asking the right questions, just to the wrong person. But here's where it gets beautiful. That open soul of yours, it's still here. And now it's wiser. Now it sees red flags faster. Now it honors boundaries. Now it trusts its own voice. The silence didn't close you, it refined you. And the love you carry now, it's still big, still deep, still open. But now it's also intentional. Now you don't just give your love away to anyone who shows up. Now you give it to people who speak, who stay, who match your effort and hold your heart gently. Because if you've survived silence and still kept your heart open, you're unstoppable. And in our final chapter, we'll talk about what that rebirth looks like, how the silence that broke you eventually becomes the reason you rise. The end was a beginning. So here you are. You survived what you thought might break you. Not because someone gave you closure, not because they came back and explained everything, but because you faced the silence and found your voice inside it. That's the part no one talks about. They talk about healing like it's neat, like it's linear, like one day you wake up and the pain is gone. But you know better now. Healing is messy. It's crying over someone who never gave you answers. It's blaming yourself, then forgiving yourself over and over. It's slowly realizing that the silence they left you with actually gave you space to hear yourself again. You stopped waiting for their apology. You stopped rewriting your message, hoping it would get a response. You stopped thinking their voice held the answer, and you started listening to your own. That is transformation. That is healing. That is how silence, as cruel as it can feel, becomes the beginning of something honest. You without needing to be chosen to feel worthy. You without clinging to words that never came. You choosing peace over confusion, truth over hope, self-love over self-blame. And maybe, just maybe, the real closure isn't what they say or don't say. It's what you choose to believe now. You get to believe that you were never hard to love. You get to believe that your feelings were valid. You get to believe that someone's silence is not a statement about your worth. It's just a reflection of what they couldn't face. And now that you've faced it, you're free. You're free to walk forward without needing someone else to finish your sentence. You're free to begin again, this time with you at the center. Because the silence may have ended things with them, but it started something powerful in you, a new chapter. And if no one else has said this to you yet, let me be the first. I'm proud of you, not for being perfect, but for being honest, for staying soft, for not letting the silence harden your heart. That's not weakness, that's power. And now you get to write the rest of the story. If this video touched something in you, if you've ever been broken by silence, but chose to keep loving anyway, type "I'm starting again" in the comments. Let others see they're not alone. Let yourself see that you're not alone. And if you're ready to go deeper into how to trust again, love again, and rebuild after being ghosted, make sure to stay connected. This journey isn't over, because the quietest endings, they often lead to the loudest rebirths, and yours has just begun.